Bruh. Bruh. Hello, gamers. Oh, how are you today? Oh, man. Oh, I'm still recovering. Oh. Yeah, between Friday night and Saturday morning, essentially, I well, on Saturday morning UK time, I gave a talk for the Linux Conf AU conference about GTK. And the original plan was, let's go to bed at a reasonable time, and then we are going to I'm going to wake up because I had to wake up at an hour and a half before the talk was supposed to start in order to do the last minute tech check. And then the talk was at 5:40 in the morning my time, so wake up at 3:45 and then set up the entire thing and then do the tech check and then just chill out a little bit. And after that, I would then do the talk and do everything else and then answer a bunch of questions if there were any questions at all. And then just go to bed again. Turns out that I decided to stay up until very, very late. And the end result was that I was awake for the entire night until I had to give the talk. And then I went to bed at 7 a.m. And the end result was that I spent most of Saturday just sleeping it off because I was completely out of sync, out of everything. I'm not used to this stuff anymore. I used to stay awake all day, stay awake all night, and then just sleep during the day back when I was uni. But nowadays, I cannot do that anymore. So the end result was that I had to spend basically most of Saturday just sleeping. And then on Sunday, I decided it was finally time, since I gave the talk, that it was finally time to update my machine to Fedora Silverblue from my Ubuntu installation. So I had to install the new SSD that I got inside the desktop machine, and then from the desktop machine get the from the new SSD install Silverblue from USB key and blah blah blah. And I spent most of Sunday restoring everything from backups. Luckily, all my applications are on Flatpak, and all my development environments are contained inside a single directory, and I had access to the old hard drive, so I could just copy stuff from the old one to the new one. And the end result was that I was able to not take like 2 days or 3 days to restore everything like it usually happens. But yeah, now I'm back on Fedora Silverblue, where I belong, and the end result is that I am back on GNOME 41 and the containerized environments. of Toolbox instead of installing random shit in my machine. Oh. Yeah. Upgrading is always a pain in the ass. Not just upgrading, but also distro hopping is always a pain in the ass. For the past 10 years, I've been installing Linux on my partition layout always had my own partition in a separate location. In this case, my own was on a separate hard drive as well. So, but and this time I just went with the default Fedora layout because I didn't want to fight against Anaconda, which is still I think it's still the worst installer on Linux. It's just not. It's plainly not good. You can see what the Anaconda team is trying to achieve, but it's just not good. And now I've read they are planning to basically just switch the entire UI to what is essentially a web UI using the Cockpit framework, which on one hand makes perfect sense because the Cockpit developers know how to set up an entire remoting experience using web UIs. But on the other, just why? No, stop. Why are you doing this? It's just a classic case of we have too many use cases that we want to serve with exactly the same UI. And these use cases are completely different in scope, complexity, structure, goals. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not even like an idea of a convergence or anything. It's just we have to cater to sysadmins that are installing a fleet of machines for random like workstation. We have to cater to server deployment. We have to cater to IoT. We have to cater for personal desktops, laptops. It's just, no. They are different use cases. They're very different use cases. You should have different UIs. For a laptop, you don't need that. For a laptop, you have a default partition layout. And then you basically just ask, do you want your home partition encrypted? Yes, no. Done. Then you dump the content of the installation media on top of the new partition layout, resize them, then you boot into the first boot experience. That's it. You don't have to do anything else. Yeah, I know the dual booting and blah blah blah. That is not important. That is not like. I mean, what the hell? It's just useless junk. Yeah, I know. Anyway, now I'm back. Sadly, it seems that the OBS version that I installed from FlatHub is running a lot more hot on my CPU than it used to be on Ubuntu. Probably because there's some driver issue. Maybe it was using the NVIDIA encoder, and now it's not. I have to figure it out. It's kind of annoying. But the fact that it works at all, just, it's great. I don't have to deal with anything now. I even tested the games that I ran on under DOSBox, and apparently they were missing a single, so the same installation, they were missing a single library from the system, and I installed it and they work perfectly. So I was very much impressed. Not something that used to happen. I still remember when all of this was science fiction. Like every time you distro hopped, you had to install everything, and you could not expect stuff to work exactly the same. I mean, in some cases you had to install a specific version of Linux, specific distribution of Linux, just to have something that worked. And then if you wanted to use something else, you sometimes you had to reinstall. So weird what we used to do. I mean, yeah, we used to be a lot more, I don't know. I don't know if you can say that. I don't know if you can say that we used to be a lot more resilient or just a lot more tolerant of pain. I mean, we're still tolerant of pain. I'm working on the Linux desktop. Of course, I'm tolerant to pain. I wouldn't be doing this otherwise. Like, writing the Linux desktop is essentially an admission that you enjoy being subject to inordinate amounts of pain. Still, the overall goal is to avoid others from feeling the pain. We endured enough for many, many lives. Might as well avoid other people suffering the same fate. Oh, what did I do? I did a fucky wucky. Sorry about that. Let's see one thing. Okie dokes. So. So today, we are going to go back to back where it all started, back to the matrix. Sorry, back to the developer documentation. Since we left it a little bit on the side last week, it got merged into the main branch, so it's live. The current like state of the. But there are a couple of things that are not ready yet, and there are a few things that needs to be written still, especially the complicated ones. Well, the more complicated ones. Also, I got some feedback from people that have been using the been reviewing the tutorials, so we probably need. I'm waiting actually for the some from actual issues or merge requests, because I don't want to like snipe the people that are currently reviewing this, but we can fix some stuff. And yeah, we should probably just go in some other section and start with that, instead of fixing stuff that I know it's not entirely correct. Still, we'll see. Yeah, if nothing happens this week, I'll go through the new one, the new. Sorry, I'll go through the old stuff that it's already committed to the main branch and fix it, as far as I understand it, and then we'll see what happens. So we should probably go to our usual builder view. Here we are. Yeah, the main problem of running with main problem of running builder under Silverblue now is that I don't have access to like pip and Sphinx in my overall in my base system, because of course I don't, and I cannot enter toolbox from here, I think. Or maybe I can. Yes, I can. Oh, so I can do this. And it does work. Oh, perfect. I was worried for nothing then. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, so I don't have an open. I don't have to open a separate terminal and enter a toolbox there. Good. Oh, you have no idea how I miss toolbox. Under Ubuntu, not having toolbox is... I don't understand how people deal with it. Oh. I honestly don't understand. Being able to just spawn your own container, install all the dependency there, and not having to care about the fact that you just dumped a bunch of development stuff inside your base system, which will inevitably fuck up stuff during upgrades. Instead, I have a very lean machine now, a very lean base OS, and then I can spawn off toolboxes and containers with everything. Of course, the main problem is that in many cases upgrading a machine means that the underlying container does not work anymore, and you have to rebase the container. I assume it's been fixed. I think the main problem is that the version of glibc, the GNU libc is not statically linked inside the tool that does the imaging and stuff, that does the containerization, which means that as soon as you upgrade toolbox, so you upgrade your machine from, I don't know, Fedora 34 to Fedora 35, and all the old Fedora 34 container images still run on the old GNU libc, but the GNU libc that is outside is different now, and the two might not match the syscalls or the version number or whatever, and suddenly stuff breaks. So you have to recreate them. I had to do that for my previous installation, and on my laptop. I think it has been fixed, or at least there's there's been work to minimize that breakage. So maybe when I upgrade to Fedora 36 when it's out, I won't have to recreate all my toolbox images. Well, let's hope. So, yeah, I talked about a little bit about the new developer documentation website on the LCA talk, and I got interesting questions even after the presentation ended. After the during well, basically there was a chat system that was running in parallel to the presentation, and you could ask questions there as a separate, like, the chat had two modes. One was the actual chat, and the other one was the queue up a question. And at the end of the presentation, the MC for the room would read the questions in order and then could mark them as answered. And after the presentation, you had the remaining questions that could be moved to the post presentation like queue, and the speaker is supposed to join that particular chat room and then answer those questions. And I got a few interesting questions here and there from people that use GTK, or they even use it for like commercial stuff. And like one question was one question came from a person that is using GTK for like commercial development, and was asking, do you have an idea of how big of a job would be to port from GTK 3 to GTK 4? And I pointed them at the migration guide that we have in our API reference. But also I've had other questions like that dealt with remoting or CSS or everything else, and was very interesting. I used to remember questions about GTK being a little bit more hostile in a couple of places where I gave a presentation about it during the GTK 3 era, mostly by people that do not use GNOME but were kind of in a tiffy about changes that we made at the time. I mean, yeah, people are still... I've seen people being salty about the GTK 2 to GTK 3 switch. Hi, Jeff. How are you? Yeah, people are still like a bit salty about API bumps from what, 20 years ago? Jesus. GTK 1 was perfect. Why did you have to move to GTK 2? Hi, Georges. People are never happy. Never, ever. Okay, so what are we going to do today? I actually wanted to go and do dialogs because they are kind of important, but also because they can be quite of a pain to set up, especially because people are still coming from GTK 3 with like nested main loops and blocking stuff. So I wanted to make sure that it gets easy to look at the idiomatic way to handle dialogues with GTK 4. So let's start with the easy one and use the message dialogues. Today is going to be a fun day moving GNOME Online accounts dialogues into separate processes because WebKit GTK 4 is a pipe dream. Yeah, I understand that feeling. With WebKit GTK for GTK 4, I feel we are letting the perfect be the enemy of good. It's... I don't know. I mean, on one hand, I understand perfectly that when you have a library like WebGTK that is as big in terms of API footprint, you really want to have some time to remove the shitty API decisions that you made like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and you have a chance to do that, then you should take it. On the other hand, though, I mean, if you don't have enough resources to actually commit to a release in a reasonable amount of time, then you should take the hit. Yeah, it's nothing is gonna break that badly. So password and spinner. I don't know. I'm not a maintainer of WebKit GTK, so I cannot really say what the people maintaining it should do. It's not my place to say, and I mean, I might be an asshole, but I'm not that kind of an asshole. On the other hand, though, seriously, probably should not be just obsessing over stuff that way. Yeah, we'll still have online accounts in GNOME 42. What shell am I using? I'm using Bash, but I have a custom PS1 environment variable. Very lead. I'm using powerline symbols and a bunch of crack. Like for instance, I check if I'm running the console under toolbox using this. And I check if I'm using a Git repository, so I print out the branch, and if there are untracked files here, as soon as I modify it, like for instance, as soon as I modified files, I get modified here, and if I add something like that, stores beginners components, it shows me if I'm added stuff to the staging area. Oh, hi, Calcium. I'm terrible at pronouncing names and nicknames, so sorry if I'm terrible that way. But yeah, this is Bash. It's just random Bash. So let's go inside the component name and message. In the index is listed as messages, but in this case it's message dialogs. Should I change that? Messages, maybe. Let's try with that and see how it feels. As usual, no image because I have to take a screenshot, but for the time being can stay that way. Message is type of dialog window that is used to notify yeah, notify the user about some action or state thing. See also, no, we don't have the notification stuff. The toast stuff is going to be added later on. We usually have, so message dialogues are kind of not great because they are basically just stop the world, do something. And to be honest, it's not a great user interaction. Unless you literally have to stop the world. But you rarely do. It's not often that happens. What usually happens is that you notify something using either a system notification, or if something happened inside your application has the key focus, then you should use a toast or what it used to be called in-app notification. And when that happens, you should let the user undo what happened. For instance, like if you deleted something, you can undo that. It's a lot better than just stopping the entire world and just waiting for user input, especially because in order to do that, usually you have to use a modal dialog, and we'll see what a modal dialog does, but a modal dialog just prevents any user any interaction with your application until the dialog is gone. And you should not do that. People really don't like that. Okay. So we should go to the HIG, because we do have feedback, maybe dialogs. Here it is, message dialog. Yep. So we can link directly to the interface guidelines. Also be used to pose a question that requires pose a question or user confirmation. That is usually okay. So the main one, the main example should live here and not be super complicated. Like let me grab the API reference. In general, so our main problem is that message dialogues are kind of lame. And dialogues in general are kind of lame. GTK4 removed a lot of API from GTK dialog. I mean, GTK message dialog is literally the JavaScript alert in your browser. It's literally just pop up something and don't do anything else. But it also has a bunch of API that made complete sense back in GTK2. Like the type of dialogue usually meant associating showing an icon in your message dialog. Let me see if I can find the old developer documentation. Yeah. Like the old HIG. If I can find that. Previous versions, not this. I think we removed a bunch of stuff. Even here, we did oh yeah, no. Interface guide. This is one of the reasons why we had to redo the entire developer documentation website. Why is it linking to the old HIG? Because yeah, dialogues here. Get a dialogue here, but as you can see, there's a lot of stuff that is still let me see if I can find the message. A utility window alert. Yeah, this is an alert, which is a message dialog, and you can see it had a freaking icon, and it's all like white space. There's nothing there, and a single button there. What the hell? Choosing the icon is also not trivial because, yeah, this is an informational dialog. All updates are complete. This should not be a dialog at all. There should be a notification. Why is it there? We did have notifications at that. It's also janky and weird. Like you run an update, and at some point the application just finishes the update and just stops everything until you press OK. Why? The updates are complete. I don't have to I don't have to press OK. It's fine. I know the updates are complete. Jank. Absolute jank. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I added a whitelist so people can actually paste links, but not anywhere outside of GNOME.org. Well, GitLab mostly, and Discourse. I don't want to deal with lots of spam. Yeah, you can see the flag here is meant to be used for like what used to be the icon and stuff. Then you get the messages, the buttons that you have to add automatically, and then you format string, and blah blah blah. There's a lot of complication that should just not be there. Yeah. Yeah, also, yeah, basically GTK message dialog is a convenience API on top of GTK dialog. And GTK dialog is a bit of convenience API on top of GTK window. It's all convenience API stacked one on top of each other. It's kind of weird. We should just get rid of GTK dialog in GTK 5. And just have a, like, yeah, message dialog is the only dialog you get. Everything else is a window, like file chooser and whatever. Print. It's because there is no API there anymore. Like in GTK 3, there used to be a run API. Possibly, yeah. It's just if you look for Powerline fonts, it's that. I even have a gist on GitHub that shows how to set up the PS1 that I used. See. Oh, come on. Probably this one. Yeah, it's this one. Yeah, it's a little bit of fancy stuff to get the colors, the color escapes. And the text GHBL, the text toolbox, Git. The reason it does Git with a wrapper instead of using Git PS1 that is provided by Git itself is that I use a blacklist to avoid having to deal with massive repositories. Otherwise, literally entering the directory takes a while. Yeah, let's go back here, and yeah. So as you can see, it's just a bunch of API, convenience API. So we can literally just copy it from the API reference, but probably tweak it a little bit so it's not incredibly opaque. Here. Yeah. And we don't want to take so much horizontal space. We can do this and then set this one also. We can do something like this. Yeah, we don't want to complicate too much. And then, yeah, aligned. Top 10 ways to see if I wrote this code. I always break the line after the signal name. I know some people that do something like this. And I know some people that put everything on a single line or every argument on a separate line, but I always break like this. Been doing that since GTK 1. So you can immediately see if I contributed that code, because you will see that most of the time. Yeah, this is a fairly simple version. So this one shows an error. It's a very simple case of showing an error dialog. And again, in this case, it's perfectly fine to use a modal. Well, it's not perfectly fine, but it's kind of the usual or a typical use case. You show a modal dialog, which means that you prevent any other interaction with any other application window, well, with any window of the current application. You do this so the user is forced to confront the fact that something has failed. In theory, you could replace this entire thing with an info bar, for instance, which is a widget that sits inside the main window. Because there is literally no point other than pressing OK. It's just notifying that there's been an error. Like GNOME Builder uses info bars to say, like, for instance, the file changed from the from outside Builder. It will tell you, do I ignore this or do I reload the file? In which case you use an info bar instead of using a modal dialog, because it doesn't like mess up the stacking order. It doesn't prevent the user from looking at the rest of the file or the rest of the UI and everything else. Stop the world user interfaces are not great in a GUI. Hi Mosley, thanks for the follow. Yeah, stop the world user interactions are typical of modal stuff. Thanks for the follow, Freetoff. They are usually the result of people adapting command line tools to GUIs, because you end up in a modal kind of situation, where the GUI has different modes of operations and you switch between them. If you are familiar with Vim, that's a modal UI. You have insert, editing, commands, and everything else. But GUIs do not really operate like that. I mean, they can be modal, but it's usually a good idea not to do that. So, do this. Then message. Here we finally see what happens when you design an API for C instead of for being bindable. So GTK message dialog new as a C API takes a format string and variadic arguments there, which are not great. So this particular API is not bindable. There is no version of this. Luckily, it's a constructor, and constructors in any C/G object library are convenience function for C. So yeah, you have to deal with every single property here, like message area is sorry, it's text, the primary text. So in this case we would use parent would be parent window, flags, we have to go back to the parent GTK dialog. So there is no flags property there. You have to set the flags. Sorry, you don't set the flags. Quite common pattern in GNOME app switching to a selection mode. Yes, there is a modality kind of toggle. To be fair, I think we stopped doing that in many applications. It was kind of a thing in the early GNOME 3, because we decided to basically have the same, not just the same UI, but it was weird to, how's it called, to switch between, well, sorry, if you have a UI that deals with documents, so objects, you don't want to have a separate window that lets you select stuff. You want to do selection inside your own, like inside your own main window. And one of the things that was used at the time as a way to deal with that was the, how's it called, the same guideline as a mobile application, where you have the entire thing and then it switches to selection mode, where you select stuff, then you exit the selection mode. It was a way to avoid using another window to do exactly the same thing. I think it was kind of removed. No, or yes. Like the search mode. I don't know if we removed that, to be fair. Yeah, no, selection and edit modes. We still have them inside the HIG, but it only applies when an application includes large collection of items, like photos or documents and stuff like that. It's not strictly necessary to implement it. We kind of eased off of that a bit. It was much more common at the beginning of GNOME 3 when we had the all finding and reminding pattern. We were trying to basically abstract the file system a bit and rely more on search, integration with online services and stuff like that, because it was more a common thing 10 years ago. Things have changed a little bit. It still makes sense on mobile. So if you have a mobile UI, then you still want to have, you don't want to have your display and then switch to a completely separate window. Instead, you just want to switch a separate mode. But it's, even on mobile, is kind of different that way. That doesn't happen entirely the same way. But yeah, let's go back here. So yeah, there is no flag property, and even the parent is not called parent, but it's called transient for. So in reality, we should not be using this as properties. We should only be using this as something like this. Reading. And there you go. But we are still missing out the rest of the stuff, so we need to do this. And then we have to do, since the dialog is modal and it's set to be destroyed with a parent, we need to do this and dialog. Put it the line before. Not dialog, but window. Yeah, as you can see, all the API is actually on GTK window. So set destroy with parent. What the flags here do is literally just setting the properties here. There is no flags property on GTK message dialog or GTK dialog or anything else. It's something that is done internally to the constructor, C constructor. And then we do dialog connect once. Then do doesn't like this. Destroy that dialog and the user responds to. Let's remove this. It's pointless. So the flags here do not do anything. Yeah, as you can see, the only thing that message dialog really does is setting the text. Oh, and we need to set the button because it has a here. So we need to do buttons, GTK message, GTK buttons close, button step here. So the only thing that the message dialog really does is literally have a way to set the text field and the buttons by itself. But for instance, immediately you will see that a bunch of this stuff is really discouraged by the HIG and should really not exist at all. Like okay, yes, no, and okay, cancel should just not exist anymore. We never removed them from GTK2 either. I mean, the original interface guidelines for GNOME 2 literally said do not ever use yes, no, cancel, okay, cancel labels for message dialogs, or in dialogues in general. So we should have removed them from GTK2. Instead, we kept them GTK2, GTK3, and now GTK4. Yes, yeah, yes. That was, yeah, some stuff. We end up missing some stuff. We do. It's not weird because we do a ton of review at the end of a development cycle, major API development cycle. We just go through the API and we start figuring out what can be removed or not. But sometimes we just forget. We just forget about stuff. It's so annoying. But yeah, okay, so a message dialog, as I said, doesn't do anything special, and the less you use it, the better. your so use markup. Yeah. If your message contains markup, contains Pango markup. Yeah, contains. Let's go. Pango markup. Yeah. And set the message dialog, use markup property. Message dialog can also contain a secondary text, which is displayed underneath the message in the GK message dialog. This is a typo. The secondary text can also use markup as long as you set the message dialog secondary use the secondary you can use the PDK message dialog secondary text property to define the secondary text. And then the secondary text can also use Pango markup as long as it's secondary. Yeah, that's basically it. Honestly, there's nothing more than that. So we need to do message dialog. There we go. And since we used GDK dialog, and GTK window API. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty easy. Again, message dialogs do not contain much. As I said, it's just a bunch of convenience API against GTK dialog and GTK window. Mostly GTK window these days. Yeah, before in GTK 3 you would have seen something like this. Res equals dialog run if res equals GTK response I don't know, close. Then dialog destroy. We removed this instead of the response here. We removed this for a very simple reason. This one was inner main loop that blocked everything from happening. The outer main loop, the one that you would spin with gapplication run or GTK main at the time, would still spin, so it would process events. But we'd have an internal main loop that would block everything as well. The issue there is that in order to make this work, GTK dialog had to connect to a bunch of signals and connect to a bunch of other things to ensure that the dialog, the inner main loop would stop at the right time. But, and this is important, there is a bunch of stuff that happens on separate main contexts. Main context is the thread local storage for a main loop. So you've got non-blocking I/O, well, blocking I/O that happens on a separate thread. You've got dbus API, dbus like signals and methods that can happen on a separate thread and get injected into the current main loop. You've got things like how's it called, the accessibility stuff, accessibility like messages that happen on the current thread but connect to a dbus endpoint, which is spun on another thread and then re-enters the outer main loop. So you've got the outer main loop that keeps spinning and receives stuff like dbus dbus events and IO like completions and threads that spin and stop. And then you have an inner main loop that runs on the same thread, and you actually do not know which main loop will actually get the correct events. So for instance, you're running a modal dialog with a blocking inner main loop, and you don't know if the accessibility, like the assistive technology like a screen reader or whatever else, is actually reading and signaling stuff to the dialog or not. And you cannot really know that. I mean, it's deterministic, but not entirely in sequence. So you may pop up a dialog, the screen reader starts reading the dialog, then an asynchronous task is running on the main application ends or terminates, and the dialog gets the signal instead of getting it inside the main window, or vice versa. The accessibility stack starts reading the main window instead of the dialog, and everything is blocking there. So we removed that because it's a mess and it should never have happened in the first place. Again, it's another case of people being used to writing command line tools. Command line tools can block at any point because they are the ones that are driving the refresh of everything. So on a command line tool, you can block and wait for user input because it's the only thing that's running usually. On a GUI is a lot different. There are many more things that can be running at the same time. There are tools that interact with your own. It's a mess. So you don't want to complicate things. You don't want to make them worse than they already are. Which means GTK dialog run had to go. And it's not like it was necessary even before. It was just a bad API. Let's call it lambda d. So it's easier to understand that it's a dialog. Right. So let's build it, see what happens. Okay. Okay, so we have message dialogues now. Yeah, as you can see, I didn't add a section on generic dialogues because generic dialogues are not that interesting. They're basically windows, at which point you're just looking at the HIG. So message dialog is there. Let's switch back to buttons. And let's go with spin buttons. Okay. Now you'll see that I have no idea how spin buttons work. I literally forgot everything about spin buttons. I probably used, like, I used them 4 or 5 times over nearly 20 years. Blah, 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 blah. So weird. Yeah. Like, for instance, spin button new takes an adjustment and it's fine. You can see here that the documentation is not great. Like, yes, it's an adjustment is a GTK adjustment. It should not be repeating the fact that it's a GTK adjustment. So it should just be the adjustment. Specify how much the rate of change in the value will accelerate if you continue to hold down. What? And the number of decimal places displayed. This is such a weird API. 99.9% of the time, it's this API you want. Like, you want to find the minimum allowable value, the maximum allowable value, and the step. That's it. I don't understand why we'd have that messy constructor. Like, this one should be probably a GTK spin button new full. And this one should be the default. Yeah, we still have API warts everywhere. Like, I understand why we do this, like, but why do we need a GTK adjustment at all? Hello, hi King of Melons, and thanks for the follow. I mean, yeah. So the reason why we have this adjustment stuff is that an GTK adjustment is a model. A GTK, the role of GTK adjustment is Here's a range of allowable values. Here's what happens when you increment it. And here's what happens when you increment it by one line, and is what happens when you increment it by a page. Hi, Giuliano. Thanks for the follow. But 99.9% of the time, you don't really want the adjustment to be an actual thing. What new does is create the adjustment for you using, well, new with range, sorry. What it does is creates the GTK adjustment for you. That's all it does. But in reality, GTK adjustment is just a bad API again. Should not be visible. Well, it should not be part of the default construction like pattern. Anyway, let's go to the HIG and see if we have we should have a spin button. Yeah. So let's go here and replace it, and spin buttons. We can just copy this. It's perfectly fine. It's a fairly reasonable description. Don't need to be more complicated than that. Yeah, we don't need this, but we need this. So we replace so the API reference has a bunch of stuff there. Like, for instance, this example would be good to have in a section on how to sorry, not this, but the signal yeah. Yeah, this one would be a good thing to have inside our tutorial, because it's kind of hidden inside the documentation. You don't immediately see it. So GTK spin buttons, all these spin buttons, usually they accept a range of values that are numeric in nature. So like integers or floating points. But it's not, strictly speaking, necessary. They can have any other value. And the way you deal with that is you deal with the input and output signals. So use the output to transform a numerical value into something else that gets displayed, like some text that gets displayed. Let's say, for instance, that you have, and this is going to be inside the example, and you know where this is going. The adjustment has like 3 possible values. It goes from 0 to 2 with a step of 1. So the first one is 0, second one is 1, and third one is 2. And the first value is going to be live, the second value is going to be laugh, and the third one is going to be love. When you press plus, it goes up, and when you press minus, it goes down. And the overall idea is that the display is going to be the alphabetical string, so live, laugh, and love. But internally, it will be turned into a numerical value, so 0, 1, and 2. Because then from 0, 1, and 2, you can use an enumeration, for instance, internally inside your application. And you don't need to have a numerical value on the UI. You can have like alphanumerical value instead. And you know this is coming because, of course, it's coming. So we're gonna add the example, the plain example here. And we'll also add an example in XML to show how to deal with this inside a UI definition file. So we can start with this. I use the spin button, ID spin. Since we can define the adjustment straight into the XML, we can start from there. So and then we set, for instance, property name lower fudge 0. In this case, we go from a classic property name upper. It's 100. And step increment is gonna be 1. And that's basically it. That's all you actually need to define a spin button in XML. You set the adjustment, and that's it. Yeah. You can also set the digits to be 0. Climb rate is 1. Yeah. You can also set an initial value of like whatever, but we'll value, we'll set it at 0. We don't need anything else, really. Yeah. In this case, it sets also the page increment. So if you press page up and page down, it goes like by 5 instead of going by 1. And then we set the, in reality, we have to set the, what's it called? The digits to 0 because we want to have an integer like spin button. So we do here let's remove this. So the digits property is set to 0. So in this case, it will only show like 0 to 100 with increments of 1. We can also do, just to keep it close to the API reference. And that's it. In C is exactly the same thing. But we need to define the GTK adjustment first, though. Here. Can't remember the order. This is why you should never have like a ton of arguments to a function. They are exactly identical in type. Never remember what the hell are you doing. Step increment is 1, page increment is 5, and page size is 0. Then you have a spin button that does a spin adjustment. And that's it. In Python is, again, same thing. But at least here we have value equals 0, lower equals 0, upper equals 100. Let's add a new line so we don't actually go over the limit. Step increment equals 1, page increment equals 5, and page size is 0. And then we have spin button. Again, the C constructor is C convenience. Here we have to pass arguments. Sorry, we have to pass properties as arguments. And we have an example of our spin button. This is a section where we do instead more complex example. So we use the input and output signal. Where do we? This. Oh, we also need to do stuff like this. Yeah, value changed. How do we call it? Changes in value. Or no? Is it a useful method or part of the actual API? I mean, the default case, you probably want to listen in. So there are two ways of listening to something. Let's add it to a section. Actually, because again, there are two ways to do this. So when I said that GTK adjustment is a model, I literally meant it. It's you listen to changes in the model. You don't listen to changes in the on the view that is the spin button, because the same GTK adjustment can be modified by multiple widgets, for instance, or you can modify the same adjustment and influence multiple widgets. I think we have a demo for that even. Let's see. I don't have it installed here. Yeah, I don't have it installed right now. But basically, yeah, the overall idea of the GTK adjustment object is that you create an adjustment, you assign it to multiple widgets that are controlled by the same adjustment, and then whenever the adjustment changes, the widgets update, and whenever you update you modify the widget, the adjustment changes, and the change is reflected in all the widgets that use it. So it's the model. You generally listen in to changes on the model. So you connect to the value property on the adjustment itself. Like you either use value changed or changed here. Like changed means that a lot of stuff has changed, like lower and upper and whatever else, whereas you want the value change signal. Or you use notify value. So you can see there is a lot of stuff that happens here. There are a lot of duplication there. And then spin button has its own value changed signal, which is essentially GTK adjustment. It's a proxy to the GTK adjustment, so you don't have to deal with adjustments at all. Every time the spin button no, every time. Yeah, the hard part here is that you have two ways of dealing with this stuff. You have the user initiated changes, which is every time the user changes the value on the spin button, you get a value change signal emission. But also you get a value change signal emission on the GTK adjustment and a notify value signal on the adjustment itself. But also what happens is if you programmatically change the adjustment, then you have a value change signal emission, a value on the spin button on the adjustment, and a notify value signal emission on the adjustment. It's a bit like GTK toggle button, where you have the active property notifying you if you toggled it yourself programmatically, or if you if the user toggled the toggle button. So in this case, it's not a simple case of saying every time the user changes stuff you get the signal, but every time the adjustment changes, which can be done programmatically or user initiated, can be a user initiated action, user initiated change. So we should probably add a note here about the nature of the adjustment. Use GTK adjustment objects as models to determine the valid the range of values they can display as well as what's the display? Spin buttons will update the current value. Sorry. The current value of the spin button will update the GDK adjustment value property and vice versa. So yeah, the model view controller without the controller part. The controller part is the normal GObject property notification. I don't know if model could link to the model view controller page on Wikipedia. It's a little bit of a nerd snipe, but we probably want to make sure and Wikipedia wiki model view controller. Okay. Yeah, I feel is a little bit of a nerd snipe here, but it's useful to make sure that we use the same terminology everywhere. And we don't like do weird things. So this is a typical model view controller kind of setup. So if you understand that, you understand it immediately how GTK spin buttons work. And if you don't, is well, whatever. So you can monitor changes in the spin buttons value by using one of these signals. GK spin button value change. GK spin button value change. Adjustment value change. And GTK and we object notify with the GTK adjustment value property. Not with, but on GTK adjustment value property. So something like this. Too much. This is gonna be GTK widget spin button adjustment 1.0. Value change. And define this. And the same thing for Python. So spin button. And create 0 and digits. Oh. And value change on. Basically, this is how you do it. Yes. So it's a kind of important thing. I mean, it's important because this is how you deal with this stuff, but the overall idea is that you don't. It's not part of the main section, but it brings attention to how you do this by using a separate section. And then we have a section on modifying the input and output. So how do we call it? Non-numerical spin buttons. Spin buttons. While spin buttons use no. Adjustments can only interpolate between numerical values, but spin buttons can show any type of alphanumerical value as long as it can be mapped to the adjustments range and current value. Yeah, it's a good description. And use the decay spin button input signal to yeah, adjustment. Okay, to transform the current content of the spin into a numerical value, and the decay spin button output signal to transform the numerical value of the adjustment into any other into the data to be displayed. And this one is going to be a long example at the very least in C, because we have to define two signal handlers. So static void spin input. Let's call it actually transform spin input. Double new value and pointer user data. Since we don't use it, we remove the we avoid compiler warnings. Then we have static void transform spin output. Now yeah, and the output is here. And then break, and then we do zero. Lower is 0 and upper is 2. Then we have a step increment of 1, page increment of 1, and the page size of 0. And then here we have adjustment, climb rate of 1, and digits of 0. Too long. Okay, the complicated part is gonna be inside these two signal handlers. So now we create a map, values, love, love, and love. We're going to use that as an assertion. So we get the input. So we get the text out of the spin button using GTK editable. So we do text equals GTK editable, get text. So at this point, text is going to contain either live, laugh, or love. One of those three. So we do something like if text and values. Okay. Actually, return immediately here. So we go through every element of the array, so every value that we assume to be valid, and if it matches, then we return the index of that. So 0 for live, 1 for love, and 2 for love. If we didn't find anything because, for instance, the user entered something or something else changed, then we just return 0. So it stays fixed. In theory, we could do... let's see. No, let's keep it that way. It's simple that way. I don't want to go in too deep into the C99 woods. Now we have to do the opposite. So we get the value by getting the adjustment. So and then we get the value out of the adjustment. Since it's all integers, we just transform it into an int using C's own rounding rules. We don't care. And then we do this. Oh, no, we don't. I mean, this is clear, but let's do something like this. So we assert here, and then we do and that's it. And this is how you transform a numerical value back and forth in a GTK spin button. So at this point, the spin button will show text instead of showing numbers. And when you press plus, it goes up one level, and when you press down, it goes down one level. But it never shows the numbers. It always shows one of these three strings. Now we have to turn this into Python code. So we do def transform spin input spin. So the new value here is an out argument for the signal. It's not it's basically a return value without being a return value. I have no idea why it's not a return value. Probably backward compatibility or weird stuff. So strictly speaking, I don't know. I don't even know if this will work on Python, but it should. So we get the text. And then we simply compare it. This is where I would love to have a match. So this in modern Python would be something like switch, I think. It's the new pattern matching operator. But we don't want to go into the weeds too much. And then value. And then we do if value spin set text move if value equals 1 spin set text. And now we just create the spin button. Well, we need to create the adjustment first. Digits equals 0. Value equals 0, lower equals 0, upper equals 2, step increment equals 1, page increment equals 1, and then page size equals 0. And then we align this so it doesn't look like ass. And here we go. So yeah, this is the same code, but in Python. Okay, useful methods. We have to link first. What are useful methods for GTK spin button? Update velocity, update policy. Always if valid. It's not really useful. It's kind of a niche. Let's see. We have more stuff here. Oh yeah, we definitely want to use this. In order to do this, we need to tell it that we accept non-numeric values. Otherwise, the spin button will only accept numeric values. Inside the editable part. So you can type the actual value. In which case, a gassert is probably too strong. Well, no. Gassert here is definitely not too strong. We need to allow only these values on the numerical side. But for everything else, we need to allow non-valid values. We can even set, if we want to be like clever about it, GTK widget, so it's one thing that usually happens there. If you insert something that is wrong, where is it? GTK widget. Add CSS class. Add CSS class. And then we do GTK widget remove CSS class. So what this does, it's kind of tricky to introduce this as this way, but no, it's kind of cheeky, but this is how you show that something is wrong inside an editable widget. See if we have it inside the human interface guidelines. We should. Text fields. Text validation. No. Feedback. There should be a, yeah, I don't know if it's there really, but basically ideally whenever you have something that can error out because of input validation, then you should set the error class, the CSS class, and then GTK will, well, the theme will do something about it. Like the default, I think, shows red border around the spin area, the editable area. So it shows that you enter something that is not valid. Whereas in this case, we remove it when we know it's valid. If there is no error, like style class gets ignored. Same here, if the error is already set, then CSS class returns immediately, so it's fine. Whereas the numbers, since you only set numbers via the GTK adjustment, and the GTK adjustment does validation on it, then you cannot really have anything else. And yeah, we should also set it here. Like for instance, if value in 0, 1, 2 spin CSS class, no, not here. spin CSS class mirror, and here instead it's spin remove CSS. Or no, we can probably do it a little bit less copy and pasty by doing if text in and then you have this. It's not the most idiomatic Python ever written, but it's understandable enough. So there aren't really other useful well, there are a bunch of methods, of course, but they're not really useful. It's very niche stuff. And everything else is, well, the digits. Maybe, yeah. The set digits method controls the precision of the value of a spin button. And then what else? No. The configure method is probably useful. I don't know. Showing. If you only need integer values, probably, yeah. This is probably the most useful one. Anything else is just very niche. So let's see what happens when we build it. Ooh, what happens here? Oh yeah. What happened here? Oh, yeah. I need to add it to the tech tree, to the talk tree. Spin buttons after radio buttons. Yeah. Let's see. We already have a for main. Probably a merge request open. Yep. Yeah, this one. Okay, branch has been deleted. Okay, so now we can do this. Yep. Maybe we can add a different... Oh yeah, let's see. So we'll see what happens now with these new sections. Yeah, at this point we are going to start adding stuff and merging it almost immediately so that we have a fast turnover, and people that want to modify, well, open merge requests to fix issues with my text, for instance, which I'm sure there are many issues, but also people that want to add examples in their own in other languages. Yeah, once we have them merged into the main development branch, people can port the examples. The entire point of this documentation is to be able to point multiple people to the same documentation so they can learn. Without having to go through a dozen different websites. So let's see a render first and see how it goes. Beginners. Components. So we have spin buttons here. So the C example is fine. The Python example is fine. The XML example is fine. Python example, yeah. Non-numerical spin buttons. Yep. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, the links are fine. Yeah. Interface guidelines. Yeah. And then we can go to... Oh, I forgot. Oh, I need to edit that. It's a level bar. Okay. We'll have to fix that. Components. Messages. Okay. Python. Yes. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, the links are fine. Pango markup is fine. Okay. So before I completely forget, component name is not component name, but it's level bar. Let's go and fix that. component name goes here. We just add another commit. Yeah, that's fine. We only have volume buttons here. Information progressive disclosure. We should have toasts that go here. So in theory, we can link directly from the messages section. So basically, messages, do not use messages, use toasts, and we link directly to the toasts, which are a libadwaita kind of thing. So it's gonna be useful for that particular kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah, for the adjustments also end up hitting being mentioned in the scales and scroll bars sections. And I was thinking of moving volume buttons, even though it's a button, it's really part of a slider. It's basically a button that pops up a slider. So I don't know, maybe we'll keep it here and we simplify the section very, very much. But I would probably start by adding a section on the scale widget so that when we write the volume button, we can link to the scale section. Yeah, and I need to add on, before I forget, let's actually add it so I literally don't forget and constantly do that. And we push that so I don't forget, because it's a classic. I think of something and then I completely forget, and then I keep doing that, keep thinking, oh, I need to add it, I need to add it, I need to add it, and never add it. It's just story of my life. Okay, yeah, so I guess, yeah, for today we've done a couple of sections. The message dialog one was not extremely complicated. It required a bunch of explanation on why we have the API that we have, but it doesn't require a lot of explanation to actually make it happen. And then we have the spin buttons, which instead require a lot more work because they can do a little bit more. So yeah, we're not gonna go into layout stuff right now. Search entries are not complicated, but I don't want to get into that particular rabbit hole. Search entries are search entries are simple-ish in the sense that in terms of API, they don't have much API, like much of an API at all. You have a search entry and then you get a bunch of signals and stuff. But the tricky bit is that you get the key capture widget. Which is, yeah, meh. So basically what this does is, if you want the search entry to start when you start typing, like start typing something and you enter in search mode, you have to tell the search entry, please listen to key events on this widget. For instance, the top level window. Once you start listening on the top level window, then the keys, as soon as you start typing, the search entry will start populating itself, even though it doesn't have key focus. Because in GTK, only one, well, everywhere, but only one widget can get key focus. So you have to specify which widget needs the focus. Otherwise, every time you would have to do a key combination, like, I don't know, Control F to search something. Do Control F, the search entry gets focused and you start typing there. But in many cases, the search entry is not even visible, and you don't want to have an explicit key combination that deals with that. So you want the search entry to be hidden, for instance, but still listen to key events on a specific widget, like top level. At which point, user starts typing, the search entry becomes visible, and you start and slurps all the key events. Gets focus, for instance, and starts slurping the key events. But there's a bunch of black magic there that we should really fix for GTK 5. And in general, you also want a search bar, not a search entry. So you get a search entry so that it manages the visibility of the entry by itself instead of asking you to do all the stuff. Yeah. This is kind of... This is a little bit of esoteric. It's not an esoteric use case. The use case is pretty clear. The API is a bunch of internals of GTK escaping out. You can almost see behind the curtains of the input machinery, which should just not happen. The problem is our input machinery is very much in need of refactoring and redesign or a review of the API and the implementation. Nobody has done that. The last set of changes was the introduction of event controllers, but those didn't really touch any of the internals they didn't touch any of the design. They just provided a different implementation of the same API to a point. A bunch of stuff still escapes. Anyway, yeah, we'll keep it this for another time. Maybe on Wednesday. Or I could shuffle around some stuff and Wednesday do the yeah, let's switch back. Yeah, I'm pondering if I should do on Wednesday the tagged entry, so we can do some actual coding, live coding, or we should do documentation writing again. I'll probably decide at the very last minute. I have no idea what to do. In terms of documentation writing, there's still a bunch of stuff that needs to be done, but it's not entirely trivial, so it will take a while. And also, I honestly hope that other people will jump in and help out, because I mean, I can write all of this, but it takes a lot less time if somebody else jumps in and helps out. Especially the parts about Libadwaita that I'm less confident about, because I'm not as familiar with the API as the rest of the stack. Anyway, I think for today we can close here. Yeah, I will put the VOD on my YouTube channel. So if you're watching this on YouTube, then please follow here on YouTube or on Twitch. I do streams on Mondays, Wednesday, and Fridays, plus the occasional stream whenever I decide to play some games. On Monday and Wednesday, I usually do documentation writing, and on Fridays, I do live coding and bug fixing. So if you're also on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Sound like a YouTuber. For everyone else, thank you for joining me today in this stream, and I will definitely shall see you on Wednesday. Bye.